Wyden and Bondi, two names that were never supposed to collide in a battle over nearly $1 billion, a locked treasury file, and thousands of unexplored financial leads. But the moment Senator Wyden stepped onto the Senate floor and demanded answers, something shifted. Because when a U.S. senator publicly accuses a Justice Department, led by Bondi, of blocking access to 4,725 wire transfers tied to Jeffrey Epstein, you know the story is no longer just about a disgraced financier.
Mr. President, Donald Trump has made some far-fetched statements over the last few months, but a stunner in the last few days was his claim that the Jeffrey Epstein matter was a hoax and a scam. Here is why the president is wrong. The figure at the center of this story was an ultra-rich, well-connected sex trafficker. He was a serial rapist of women and young girls. And for some reason, the Trump administration, that claimed they'd be the most transparent administration ever, turned on a dime. The president had run on a campaign with a promise to expose the Epstein files. Now he and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, say, nope, nothing to investigate. When it comes to Epstein and sex trafficking, all these claims are just ludicrous. I want the American people to know that that's wrong. If you want to know why, just look at the latest report from our investigators that was discussed in the New York Times this morning. Now, somewhere in the Treasury Department, Mr. President, locked away in a cabinet drawer, is a big Epstein file that's full of actionable information. Follow the money details about his financing and operations that await investigation. Last year, the Biden administration allowed our investigators to look at portions of the file. We did that at the Treasury building. Here is what it says. Treasury's Epstein file details, Mr. President, 4,725 wire transfers. Let me repeat that. 4,725 wire transfers, adding up to nearly $1.1 billion flowing in and out of just one of Mr. Epstein's bank accounts. If you ask me, that is more than 4,000 potential lines of investigation right there. Hundreds of millions more flowed through other accounts. That's even a lot more to investigate. The file shows that Mr. Epstein used multiple Russian banks, which are now under sanctions, to process payments related to sex trafficking. A lot of the women and girls he targeted came from Russia, Belarus, Turkey, and elsewhere. One shudders to think about the kinds of people who must have been involved in trafficking these women and young girls out of those companies and into the Epstein web of abuse. Again, these are all potential leads, Mr. President, the Department of Justice ought to be digging into. This is about years and years of international sex trafficking. None of this is a hoax. None of it is a scam. And I'd like to say I consider it insulting to the intelligence of the American people for the Trump administration to simply say there is nothing to investigate here. Now, when the Trump administration came in with a lot of fanfare about transparency and openness, I said, I'm going to follow up on that. So I wrote to the Attorney General, Ms. Bondi, Treasury Secretary Bessent, FBI Director Patel, and I asked them all to produce the Epstein file to the Senate Finance Committee so it could be reviewed. In fact, I've made that request multiple times. The Trump commitment to transparency, based on the response, didn't mean a whole lot because they just refused. Here's what one Treasury official wrote back to me. I'll quote here. The Department of Treasury has previously made documents available relating to the matter in response to your inquiries. Accordingly, we understand that you have the information you seek from the Treasury related to this request. We thank you for your attention to this important issue. Mr. President, for anybody who's familiar with how these discussions go in Washington, D.C., what I just read was code for the bureaucracy saying, you're asking for information, go pound sand. The Trump administration may be trying to close the books on the Epstein sex trafficking. But I want it understood, as a senior member of the Senate Finance Committee, where we spend a lot of time looking at where substantial sums of money are going, particularly if they may be promoting wrongdoing and helping to evade taxes. We are going to stay on this fight to hold the wealthy individuals accountable for the harm that they clearly were involved in injuring the young women and others in this sex trafficking. So I'm going to have more follow-up for Attorney General Bondi very quickly. As for today, Mr. President, if she doesn't want to do the investigating, doesn't want the DOJ to do it, let me just restate my original demand. Have that Treasury information given to the Senate Finance Committee and have us, on a bipartisan basis, do our work. That's what we do in important investigations. If the Trump people believe they need additional authority to carry out the requests that I make again this afternoon, let me offer to help them write the bill myself. The idea that there is nothing more to investigate, not when you have 4,000 wire transfers, many of them associated with the possibility of wrongdoing and sex traffic promoting. The idea that you have that and there's nothing to investigate when it comes to the Epstein sex trafficking operation is ridiculous. Pam Bondi was the Attorney General in the state of Florida, where a lot of the Epstein crimes were committed. The Attorney General ought to know better, of all people. Mr. President, I can't begin to understand the President's handling of this or why he thinks this is just going to go away. But I'm here to say that our investigators have spent 3 full years looking into this. And the reason why is because we feel so strongly about the horror of sex trafficking and our commitment to root it out. The President of the Senate is new to this body, but I'm sure he's dealt with these issues before. You can't have a much bigger horror in front of you than sex trafficking abuse. So we're talking about real evil done to women and girls by Jeffrey Epstein. And Mr. President, nobody gets to sweep that under the rug. I yield the floor.
It becomes a question that hits deeper. What is being kept out of public view, and why? From the very first sentence of Wyden's speech, it was clear he wasn't playing political theater. He wasn't grandstanding. He was sounding an alarm built on massive financial activity, sealed files, unexplained refusals, and a trail of money that leads into some of the darkest corners imaginable. And as he spoke, the room shifted. Because when Wyden and Bondi appear in the same story, the stakes aren't small, they're national. Wyden said there was a file, a massive one, sitting inside a Treasury cabinet, a file the public has never fully seen. A file packed with details about Epstein's financial network, international transfers, foreign banks, sanctioned institutions, and thousands of monetary movements that investigators believe could lead to answers that have been buried for years. And according to Wyden, Bondi's DOJ refused to let Congress see the whole thing. Not a few pages, not a summary, the entire file. And that's where everything changed, because Wyden isn't talking about interest. He's talking about evidence. He's talking about a financial map of an operation that exploited women and underage girls. No explicit details, but the scale alone tells the story. And he wants the American people to understand the truth. None of this is a hoax. None of this is exaggerated. None of this is something to shrug off because it's politically uncomfortable. This is real. This is documented. And the numbers alone make your stomach drop. The first thing he revealed was staggering. Nearly $1.1 billion moving in and out of just one account tied to Epstein. Think about that. Not a company, not a corporation. One man, one operation, one shadow network that managed to move money so smoothly that it took years for anyone to piece the numbers together. And then came the detail that left the chamber silent. 725 wire transfers, 4,725 separate financial movements that investigators believe could lead to answers about accomplices, enablers, facilitators, and institutions that may have helped hide the operation. Not definitive accusations, just leads. Thousands of them. Enough to fuel investigative teams for years. But the problem, Wyden said, is simple and maddening. Congress can't follow the leads if Bondi's DOJ keeps the file locked away. And this isn't speculation. He quoted Treasury officials outright. Their response was less than cooperative. Polite on the surface, dismissive underneath. Bureaucratic code for, "You're not getting anything new." A thinly veiled way of telling a senior senator to stop asking questions. Wyden didn't accept that he shouldn't, no senator should, because Epstein's activities spanned continents. Victims came from Russia, Belarus, Turkey, and other countries. The transfers moved through multiple foreign banks, including institutions that later ended up on sanctions lists. That means financial red flags were everywhere. Payments crisscrossing borders, accounts spreading across jurisdictions, money flowing like a hidden river. But according to Wyden, the very people who should have been chasing those leads chose instead to block the way. Bondi's DOJ refused full transparency. Treasury refused to cooperate beyond minimal compliance. And the file, the one Wyden says contains thousands of investigative threads, stayed closed. This is the moment the story becomes bigger than Epstein. Because this level of secrecy from government agencies isn't normal. It's not standard procedure. It signals something else, something deeper. Maybe institutional fear. Maybe bureaucratic pressure. Maybe internal conflict. Wyden isn't claiming a conspiracy, but he is claiming something almost as troubling. A system that protects itself, even when accountability is required. And here's the part that hits the hardest. Wyden wasn't speaking as a partisan opponent. He emphasized this repeatedly. He wasn't trying to embarrass anyone or score cheap points. His committee has spent 3 years trying to understand the financial structure behind the exploitation. Years. Not weeks. Not months. Years spent reading documents, reviewing accounting patterns, interviewing investigators, and trying to put together the full picture. And still, after all that time, he says critical pieces remain hidden on us. He turned his attention directly to Bondi, as Florida's Attorney General. Bondi oversaw the state where many of Epstein's crimes took place. You would expect someone with that background to push aggressively for transparency, to demand accountability, to prioritize victims and survivors. But Wyden says the opposite happened when she entered federal leadership. Instead of opening the doors closed. Instead of sharing files, the files were sealed. Instead of empowering investigators, they were told to move along. And Wyden made sure the country heard that he pressed. Why is a Treasury file with nearly 5,000 leads still locked away? Why can't Congress see it? Why does a powerful government agency refuse oversight? And why is Bondi, of all people, blocking access to information from the very state where this began? He didn't accuse, he didn't defame, he pointed to facts, documents, refusals, and patterns. And he asked the question millions of Americans are now asking. What exactly is inside that file that no one wants Congress to see? There's a reason his speech hit so hard that it wasn't emotional, that it wasn't dramatic, it was factual, detailed, and unsettling. He talked about sanctioned banks. He talked about international trafficking patterns. Without graphic language, he talked about the victims, emphasizing harm and exploitation without crossing any lines. That he talked about the moral duty of oversight. He talked about the importance of transparency. And he made one point absolutely clear: no one in power gets to bury an investigation of this magnitude. This story isn't about gossip. That it isn't about politics. That it isn't about scoring wins in a partisan fight. It's about whether a system built on accountability actually works when the target is wealthy, powerful, or connected. Wyden ended his speech with one of the strongest demands of his career: that if Bondi's DOJ refuses to investigate, then Congress should. That if DOJ refuses to release the materials, then Congress should force them. That if authority is needed, Wyden offered to write the legislation himself. And that's what sets this apart: that he didn't say someone should do something. He said he would do it. He said Congress should do it. He said the American people deserve it. Because behind every transfer, every dollar, every sealed file, there are human lives, people hurt, people exploited, people who deserve answers, not delays. And this is why the story remains alive, why people keep talking about it, why investigators haven't given up, why journalists keep pressing, why survivors refuse to be erased. That Wyden's message was simple: transparency is not optional. Accountability is not negotiable, and no one, not a billionaire, not an institution, not an official, is above oversight. This story is far from over, and the only way it continues is if people stay informed, stay vocal, and keep pushing for the truth, every part of it. If you want to stay updated on every development, every revelation, and every attempt to uncover what's been hidden, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Because the fight for transparency is just getting started.